What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update of sorts to a video I made almost 2 weeks ago, discussing some of the financial problems that have been troubling Paizo, the company that owns Pathfinder. As somebody who's very invested in Pathfinder, especially the video games, that's something I tend to keep up with. And since I made that initial video, there have been a couple of different updates on the situation overall, and it felt appropriate to, of course, sort of relay that. And it is mostly good news. Basically, at the end of the day, Paizo and Archives of Nethys have reached an agreement allowing them to continue mostly as they were, with some slight changes that I will detail here in a moment. However, I do want to point out that the main issues surrounding their financial situation have not really changed, and obviously wouldn't, as that isn't something that's going to happen quite that quickly. But mostly, I was just glad that they listened to feedback on cutting ties with Archives of Nethys, and chose to find a more amicable solution that seems to work for everybody involved, while Paizo remains focused on getting back on their feet, of course. But to explain all of that a little bit, there will be a link to the previous video down below if you want a more in-depth summary, but as a very quick recap before I get into the updates, basically Paizo, the company that owns Pathfinder and Starfinder, is in quite a bit of trouble because early in 2025, another company, Diamond, a distribution company, went out of business, and Paizo had an exclusivity contract with them in terms of their physical inventory. And to be incredibly brief, this left Paizo basically unable to access an estimated $10 million worth of their physical inventory, including finding new distributors because of the exclusivity part, meaning that they basically couldn't sell anything for basically all of 2025, and while that has recently changed with that exclusivity part being put to an end through court, those proceedings are going fairly slowly, and as a result, and will likely continue to have an impact on Paizo's overall business, and they're focused on, of course, working to the side of that as a result, setting up a different distribution network, while also cutting expenses where they can. This is why they had to lay some people off at the beginning of June, but all of that is truthfully old news. Like I said, that initially happened in January of 2025, and that's something they've been dealing with, and what actually prompted me to make that initial video was a different thing that they did, which was they cut their ties initially with Archives of Nethys, this being a sort of website and community resource where you could access all of the updated rules for the TTRPG in a single place. So rather than having them spread across all the different rule books, you could look up how something worked immediately, and this was, and still will be now, an official resource. So initially, the reason all of this went down is that Archives of Nethys had a commercial license agreement, basically saying that they would give them early access to all these rule books and stuff, so their volunteer team could go through it and get it all organized and put onto the website and ready for people to actually view and use. And with their official agreement, they were also allowed to use the official art and everything that the community use policy does not include. Now, in exchange for this, what they were supposed to be doing is paying royalties, but Archives of Nethys was never like a for-profit thing. Most of their teams were volunteers, they don't take in anything but donations, really. And so Paizo was never actually getting royalties for this, despite them being in this agreement for years. And so when Paizo suddenly decided to cut that agreement, in the wake of everything else they've got going on, there was an immense amount of confusion about why. Speculation on my end, certainly, about whether or not this was stemming from concern about cannibalized sales or something, and that's where we get into these updates. So, not too long after I made that video, the CEO of Paizo put out an update that was meant to clarify the reason that they cut that initial agreement. Now, given their most recent update, I'm inclined to believe this a little more. But I will fully admit that when this was initially put out, this initial update that they did, I was a little skeptical of it. But the main point of the whole thing was that their concern was not so much that Archives of Nethys wasn't bringing in royalties or anything, but it was that they were supplying official art and everything that only the Archives of Nethys was allowed to use, but that ultimately what was happening is a bunch of other websites and places were taking those art assets and using them for themselves, and what this was requiring Paizo to do apparently was basically make their legal and licensing teams put up DMCA takedowns and cease and desist notices, that kind of thing, and it was just eating up a lot of their time and money through that route, according to this particular update. And that, apparently alongside overseeing the rest of the licensing agreement, which was never actually earning them any money, was the reason that they ultimately decided to cut ties. Now, also, according to this update, there was a little bit of back and forth about them being in conversations to figure something out before it was unceremoniously announced that all this was happening. But honestly, that's just a lot of he said, she said. In my opinion, it isn't super useful because ultimately, on just this past Friday, July 24th, Paizo and Archives of Nethys put out a statement together, basically announcing that they had reached an agreement that should make everybody happy, ideally. So, to keep it relatively simple, the Archives of Nethys and Paizo will retain an agreement that is less formal than a commercial license, which is going to reduce the oversight and work required from Paizo, and the Archives of Nethys won't have to worry about reporting royalties that were basically zero anyway. Now, on the flip side of this, what isn't changing here is that the Archives of Nethys will only be using art from the community use policy, which is significantly less art than they have been using for all of their images. This is to address the main problem Paizo seems to have had with this agreement at this point in time, but they did also mention that Paizo is planning to add more art to that policy soon, and thus there should just be more art available for everybody, including Archives of Nethys to actually use, because if you weren't aware, there really wasn't a lot of art included in the community policy prior to this. It was honestly pretty underwhelming, but that should apparently be getting an update soon enough. Now, on the flip side of that, Archives of Nethys will continue to receive PDFs in advance of their actual release, and this is so they can get their rules and everything together to coincide with the launch of these things, which will keep the website from having to deal with the delays, as again, they're all volunteers, and they'll just be able to continue providing the service that they are providing. And what's more, Archives of Nethys will continue to host the Pathfinder First Edition rules as well, the Legacy rules. That was also something that kind of got caught up in all of this. It wasn't super relevant these days, but thanks to second edition, but also something that was included in there. But when you put all of that together, at least as far as this specific decision, it looks like everybody should come out happy here. So in theory, Paizo will have less work and be able to address the theft of their art assets as they see it, preventing, them from having to send as much stuff with like cease and desist and everything. The change in the exact nature of the agreement itself should leave them with less to maintain, which will allow them then to, of course, put those resources elsewhere, which, given their strained financial state outside of this, is seemingly the main concern they had overall anyway. And Archives of Nethys also continues to do what they do, providing a valuable community resource, albeit with less art by the sounds of it, but otherwise pretty much unchanged. But more than anything, I'm also just glad that Paizo actually listened here, though to be fair, the community response was not exactly nothing. In particular, though, I do think it is very good for their overall image right now to be able to work with partners, especially, in a way that is a win for everybody involved. Mostly because I think it signals to other companies and people you might like to work with that you can, in fact, be flexible and find solutions to problems with this stuff and potentially come to agreements to make things happen that people actually want to see, like for instance more Pathfinder video games, as those are all ultimately licensed products, as it were. But mostly this is just really good news. I was happy to see it, especially after again the sort of shock of it happening to begin with, which is what prompted that initial video, and so it felt only right to update it and honestly share some positive news at least. So while again this does not solve Paizo's broader financial problems, that's going to take some time to course correct, simply because a lot of it there's really nothing they can do about, because so much of it is tied up with Diamond's bankruptcy, which is going to take who knows how long to get sorted out in court, and Paizo obviously can't wait around for that forever, and so they're doing everything they can everywhere else to get their house in order, ideally, and I continue to wish them the best with that. I certainly own a couple grand worth of their rulebooks as it is, so I would like to continue to see them in business, but either way, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about all this down in the comment section below, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.